Please join me in welcoming Monica Dangler, Maddie's Executive Leadership Fellow at Pima Animal Care Center.
So hi everyone. Today we're going to be doing a roundtable, so it's going to be a lot more interactive. We're going to be answering questions and talking about best practices. So get ready to talk out loud. Yeah, I know, right? So to start off, what we're going to do, I'm kind of mixing it up because this is a big crowd. How many people in here have things that they want to hire more staff for? Right? Yeah, everybody. Yeah, everybody's like, I need more staff. That's the only thing I can do. How many of you have reasons why volunteers can't do certain things? Yeah, you all do. Come on, put up your hands. Right. So let's talk. So that's what I want to talk to you today about, is what those obstacles look like and how we can kind of work with them. Some of our obstacles are because we're municipal facilities. Some of them are liability reasons. Some of them are lots of reasons. So let's talk about those different things and how we can kind of work around those. So we'll just start off with, I've got Laura up here. Let's start off with what's your burning questions about volunteers? Yes. Oh, there you go.
Hey, we are a rescue that works basically completely out of our own homes, and there's really only about 2 of us that do this. Mm-hmm. And so inviting somebody onto my property to volunteer with us, it's not the coming onto the property, it's them knowing where we live, because in our area they drop off animals all the time. Mm-hmm. And I actually have multiple animals that have been dropped off near me because people have figured out where we live. So how do you deal with that?
Oh, I don't know. That's a really good question. Yeah, it's kind of, right? You're like, that's kind of creepy. I mean, I would probably, right, I feel like this is so loud. Normally, right, I would say bring volunteers on as fast as you can, as easy as you can, make it simple. Do not make them jump through hoops. But in your situation, it's a little bit different, right? And everybody's going to be in different situations. For you, I might do a little bit more background checks on them. Learn a little bit more about them before you're like, come on over to my house. Now you know where I live. Let me give you my key and code too. So do a little bit more background and definitely have those expectations put in place. We're not really good about telling people what we're expecting from them. So from the get-go, right, like, this is my house, I expect this to happen and not these things, and this is what's going to happen if those things happen. So just being really upfront. Oops, is it still on? Yeah, okay. Yeah, like a waiver, but also just written expectations. Just to clearly lay it out so everybody kind of knows what's going on. Yeah. What other kind of questions?
Hi, we are a 501c3. We have the largest, we are the largest nonprofit organization in our county with over 300 members.
Nice.
Yeah, there are only 25 of us that do anything.
Yeah.
You know, they love to say, you know, we're part of HATS. Oh yeah, I'm a member of HATS.
Yeah.
But we can't get them engaged.
Right.
And we try. I mean, we try. It's hard.
Yeah. So for something like that, and that happened, I mean, everybody always, right, we have thousands of volunteers, but the ones that are actually doing it are a lot smaller population of that. But again, I think it comes back to expectations, right? And in this situation, it's what do we need from you and how is it helping the mission? A lot of people, you know, they want to volunteer for different reasons, right? They got in trouble, they got a ticket they got to pay, their mom's bothering them, they're not employed, whatever it is, or they're like, I really want to help the animals. But letting them know how what they're doing is impacting your mission and your ability to save lives. That's going to give them more buy-in. You're going to start seeing people, right? So the average volunteer, I don't know if you guys know this, the average volunteer wants to volunteer 1 hour a week max, right? And we're like, but we need them 40 hours a week. But start them out on that 1 hour. Have some activities that are really like easy peasy. They're not real hard. You can give them a one-sheeter or a quick video to watch, and they can do it. Once they start getting involved in your organization, a lot of those volunteers are now they're like, oh, I've got 20 hours a week. Now that I understand how I'm making an impact and how I'm making a difference. So really just communicating that out. A great way to do that is every one of your positions have a job description, or sometimes we don't like to call them job descriptions because they're volunteers, a position description. What's the background? Why do you need volunteers to do this? How is this impacting what you're able to accomplish? And then what they need to be able to do. Just because I signed up to be a volunteer doesn't mean I get to do whatever I want. You have to be 18 or older. You have to have dog handling class. You have to have these things. And then here's your time commitment. That's another big thing we miss, right? Like sometimes, but we got all these volunteers, but they only come in once a month to walk dogs. That might be a safety issue for them to come in only once a month to walk dogs. To work in your clinic might be a safety / time suck to have somebody who only comes in once every 2 months. You're retraining them each time. But to do laundry, they can come in once every 6 months. Who cares, right? Like they should know how to do laundry. Shouldn't be a problem. So put that time commitment on what you need, so they know up front, in order to be able to help them in this way, this is what I need to be able to commit to. Along that line with the time commitment, keep this in mind. So our thrift store, I don't think Derek's around, so he actually wasn't in charge then, so I can tell the story. The thrift store at APA, when it started, they were like, we need volunteers. I'm like, cool, how many do you need? What times do you need? All those things. And they're like, we need volunteers who will commit to a 6-hour shift, the exact same 6-hour shift, every single week. How many people have the same 6 hours available every week? And you're like, yeah, I can totally do it. Nobody, right? And I'm like, so what? I'm like, why do we need somebody to be there 6 hours to sort donations, right? Like that's kind of an easy peasy thing you can do. No, you don't need lots of skills to do that. So then we kind of worked on that, and we're like, yeah, you could do that for an hour. I'm like, and that's kind of horrible, sorting through all those donations. Who wants to do that more than an hour? So let's make that short. But cashiering at the thrift store, you got to put a lot more training into them. You need to have somebody who you can count on, things like that. So yes, maybe that's going to be 4 hours, or they have to work in the thrift store for a certain amount of time. So think about that when you're thinking of those time commitments. Yes, we would love every volunteer to be available an 8-hour shift, the exact same time every week, so we can make a schedule and it's super easy, but that's not the reality. We need to make it flexible for the volunteers so we can still get them in. Did that answer your question enough? Yeah? Okay, great. Do we have another question back here? Oh yeah, there we go.
So going a little bit back, because we're a smaller organization that has, we're strictly volunteer based, so it's like harder. And like maybe 5 to 7 people, trying to get everything done. We have volunteers coming in and out, but how do you quote unquote, sexy it up? Because you know how poop scooping is like the worst. Everybody knows it. Mm-hmm. I think people are not coming back because of how hard the work is. Or even getting new volunteers to come in. What would be a good strategy to do all that and to not, throw 50 dogs out and be like, okay, here it is. Mm-hmm. We have a list and everything, but.
Yeah, for sure. So what I found that worked really great, I can't take total credit for this. I used to be the volunteer manager at APA, just so you guys know why I talk about APA a lot. What we found that worked great, and I actually stole it from some other shelter, and when she told me her numbers and her results, I thought she was lying. I was like, there's no absolute way you could have that happen. But we were like, we got to do something. We had about 10% of the people who finished orientation ever volunteered an hour. That's not very many people when there was thousands of people. There was 3,000 people a year coming through orientation and 300 were sticking. And we had a pretty good idea just from feedback from volunteers, right? I don't know if you guys got to tour APA or not, but right, it's big, it's loud, it's stinky, no one knows where anything's at, and we're like, we think it's just because they're kind of getting lost, but we're not sure. And we were pretty sure that nobody wanted to pick up dog poop or do any of those things. We were wrong about the dog poop part. People pick up dog poop for us. There's lots of our volunteers in here now that pick up dog poop every day. But we implemented a piece and we called it a jump start. So we did our online orientation. If you're not doing it, do it. It's easy. It takes so much. Don't do an orientation in person. It takes way too much time. we'd do orientation, we'd do an in-person tour, walk everyone around, and then we did 3 jump starts. The person I stole it from did 4 jump starts. I mean, it just depends on your organization. We had lots of little things to be done. All of these things are things that anybody can do with a quick 5-minute introduction to it. Laundry, scooping the kennels, scooping litter pans, doing dishes, feeding the dogs, all those really super easy things. Wiping down the kennel cards after it rains, picking up the poopy leashes out of the play yards, all those things. And then we had, so we'd have them do those. We were lucky enough to have 2 volunteer team members that were part-time that did this, but you could have volunteers be the teachers too. And the volunteers would schedule a time to come in, and they would take 3 of them at a time, like, great, so you're gonna do laundry today, let me show you how to use the washing machines. You're gonna do bowl washing, let me show you where the soap is and how to do it. Here's the protocol that's on the wall, so you know it. You're gonna go around and pick up all the tennis balls out of the play yard. That was super helpful. They did 3 of those. They learned, they kind of got used to walking around. They got used to the dogs jumping at them in their cages and stuff. They learned who to go to. They knew what people on staff they could go to. They just became more familiar with what was going on. And they also learned how to do those basic things. We had volunteers at APA that had been with the organization since 2008 that didn't know how to clean a kennel, that didn't know how to do laundry. They didn't know where the laundry room was, right? So now they know where it's at and people are helping. As we did that, we were tracking everything. You guys have heard about data every day and everything. Use your data, track. We were tracking what date they did every piece of the onboard. When did they do this? When did they do this? And then we would analyze it to see if there's any gaps that we needed to just shorten it up a little bit. We also put feedback. After they would do each piece of the onboarding, there was a survey where we'd be like, how did you like that? Do you know what your next step is? Whatever, right? Some comments, so that way we could touch base back with them. Or we could see, is there an issue that we need to fix on our end because they're not learning what they need to do. We had instantly, like literally the same week we started doing those, a 40% increase in volunteer retention. 40%. By the time I left, and it was going on for about 6 months-ish, we were at about 60%. It was great. We also saw, as people were doing that about a couple months in, we saw volunteers volunteering to do laundry. Like, we had to start taking laundry off the task for them to do because there were so many people doing it. Poop fairing, we started seeing dog walkers. Poop, that's what we called scooping the poop in the kennel. Poop fairing, we saw the dog walkers scooping their own poop. Where before there was like, what? I don't know where the tools are. So we started seeing all these things. So it wasn't just onboarding them and we're keeping them on more. It was, do you guys hear me still? Yeah? It was also I know, I was like, I think it's off. Can you hear me now? There we go. So it wasn't just keeping them on longer. It was also getting those regular tasks done as well to help us then focus on everything else. So that was super helpful. Of course, we asked for feedback. We made our returning volunteers do it. There was 3, you had to do 3 if you're a new volunteer. If you're returning, depending on how long you were gone, you did 1 or 2 of those. And I was like, oh, we're gonna get some kickback from those returning volunteers. They're not gonna like this. Their feedback was amazing. They were like, this is so awesome. I had volunteered here for 2 years prior to the break I took. I didn't even know how to do these things. I didn't know this existed. So that was great to re-onboard them and get them back in the mission and re-engaged with the organization. So don't be afraid to try those. And you also hear a lot about piloting. Pilot everything, always be ready to adjust. We were measuring all that data so we could readjust, both through looking at the time frames it took people to go through, as well as that feedback that we got from them.
My question, my question is around volunteer retention, because I find that at a certain point, people kind of drop off, and I'm wondering if you have any strategies or advice for that.
Yeah, for sure. So retention, there's a couple things with retention. One, we look at retention is like people when they leave is super bad. we shouldn't look at it that way. Sometimes they leave because it's really good. They leave because they were unemployed when they started volunteering with us, and now they're employed. Yay for them, they have a job. Like, who wants to be sad about that? Sometimes they're now working for our organization or another organization, right? They left because they went to college, right? There's lots of really good reasons why they're leaving. So instead of just looking at, are they leaving? Why are they leaving? The people we want to know, that we want to find out information from, are the people who are just leaving and we don't know why, right? Is it because we need to give you more training? Is it because this wasn't the right fit? And even if they leave because it's not the right fit, yay, good. You realize it's not the right fit. Animal shelter work is not for everybody, so let's go ahead and help them find something that's better. So look at retention in those ways as well, and it's not always negative to have a low retention rate. But we have to look at retention. Why are people leaving? And a lot of times we're not giving them the training that they need. They don't know what to do. Austin Pets Alive, when I started, for the first 3 years we were there, right, they did their orientation, and they were like, all right, have at it, good luck, right? Not very many people did really well there. That's why we had 300 people a year that would stick around. The people that stuck around were those extroverts who were fine just figuring it out and doing their own thing, which was great for Austin Pets Alive because those were also our leaders starting these programs. But there was a lot of people that left that were really good volunteers because they weren't getting the support they wanted. So we need to look at that. Are we giving them the support they want? And yeah, keeping them around. Sometimes it's culture, right? Are they leaving because it's a pretty toxic environment? You got some naughty things happening around. That happens a lot, especially in animal welfare. And if it's a culture thing, let's change that culture. You can do lots of different things to change the culture. I don't know, did Kristen do anything about the culture expectations for the shelter or anything? I don't think, kind of touched, she just showed it, but right, like if you don't have a workplace culture agreement for your shelter, work with your managers, executive directors to create one of those. Those are super important. When we created that at PAC, it was an all shelter thing. It started with all the managers were like, what do we want to do? We kind of made like a outline framework, brought it to the rest of the leadership, added some more things, and then we sent it out to volunteers, fosters, and we're like, what are we missing on here? What do you want to see? So make it everybody, so everybody's got buy-in. But then also same with a volunteer vision statement. I bet, does anybody in this room have a volunteer vision statement? Yeah, almost nobody. Do a volunteer vision statement. Austin Pets Alive has one. PAC has one. So feel free to look those up. You can probably just Google them and find them, I'm guessing, but we can always send those to you too. But it's just like your mission statement for your organization, but it's volunteer specific. How do you want to use volunteers in your organization? And again, that's setting expectations up front, not just with your volunteers on what they can expect, but with your staff, right? This is how we use volunteers in our organization. If you're not okay with that, then this is probably not the right organization for you. And that, like I said, that just really sets expectations and helps that culture. And then just helping, once you have that culture, workplace culture agreement, your volunteer agreement, right, spelling that out, it makes those conversations pretty easy to have where you're like, so remember that volunteer agreement you signed when you did your orientation? You're not being very respectful when you did X, Y, and Z. And they might, right, say, oh, I didn't realize that was disrespectful to call somebody a name. Okay, well, now we know that saying that is not very respectful, right? It just makes that conversation easy to have so they know about it, and that really helps with your culture. And of course, culture is, top down, right? If you're being a jerk, you can't expect your volunteers not to be a jerk. So yeah, that answer that for you? Okay.
I just had two quick questions. First of all, what volunteer software do you use to track the numbers?
Oh, well, at PAC, we use Logistics. It's not really my favorite at all. And every day I'm cursing it. So we have logistics right now. At APA, we use Better Impact. Better Impact's got some really great features. They're here, so you can talk to them. They've got an e-learning piece, which makes putting video trainings on there, and then it updates the qualification, so it works really great. GivePulse is also here. GivePulse is awesome. We're actually looking to transition to GivePulse at PAC. And they've got all those things. They don't have the e-learning piece, but there's lots of workarounds. But they both of those work really well. And I would recommend either of those. And George is here and his team, and they're really great to talk to too. So
Okay. The second question was, what is your take on volunteer appreciation?
Yeah.
And how big of a piece does that play in retention rates?
I mean, yeah, volunteer appreciation is definitely important. Some shelters kind of go overboard. I'm on this like volunteer manager listserv, and some of the stuff they're doing, I'm like, you're spending how much money? Oh my goodness. Where APA, I literally had no budget for volunteer appreciation at all, which was fine. I had a team of volunteers that helped me with it because that's a really big task. And we had limited resources, so we did what we could do. One thing that we did that volunteers appreciated, and when you talk to your volunteers, a lot of times they're like, I don't want you to spend money on me, spend that money on the animals. So don't go and spend thousands of dollars on them. But we did monthly meetups. We would find different bars, restaurants, different places. We actually polled the volunteers. We're like, what would you like to do? One of the things they wanted to do was group dog walks. Super easy, that's free. They just wanted to get together and go on a group walk. Sometimes if you do them at like bars or restaurants, they'll either give a kickback to the organization on the money spent, or they'll be like $1 off beers or whatever. So it's just a fun time for volunteers to kind of interact with each other and meet them, especially if you're in a really big organization where like dog and cat volunteers meet each other. It's always funny when they start like mingling. They don't know what to do with each other. So there's like those things that's really fun. But then we did National Volunteer Week, which is coming up. I think it's the end of April, the last week of April, 25th. National Volunteer Appreciation Week. We did lots of fun stuff. We did lots of really easy stuff, right? We want to make sure they feel appreciated. So by having other volunteers do stuff for them, that's not very appreciative, right? But we'd have staff bring in cookies and things. And we would just assign them days. We had enough staff. I'm like, hey, just bring like a dozen cookies, whatever. Some of them, right, they don't cook. They'd bring in a box of cookies. Great. And then we'd have them throughout the different areas and be like, hey, today we've got cookies. We'd have them write like a little love letter card to the volunteers and say thank you. Easy to do. We would also have our platinum party. So we have, for Austin Pets Alive, we have our platinum volunteers, and pretty much all the volunteers you see helping out here are platinum volunteers. Are amazing. But those are volunteers that have been with the organization 2 years or longer, and have volunteered 75 hours or more the last 2 years. We went with that number. It was just kind of arbitrary just because we were like trying to figure out a party system. And we're like, okay, that's going to be too many volunteers. That's too many. We're like, 2 years, 75 hours each year. Okay, that's a manageable number that we can have a party for. And then if we had extra opening invitations, we'd invite those like up and coming platinum volunteers, so they could be like, that's great. The platinum volunteers got a special shirt that said platinum volunteer, so everybody knew they were awesome, that they can wear, and we bought those for them. And that was always a really fun party. We'd hold it, usually for us, it was about 200 people that we needed to invite, and then staff too, so that's pretty hard to find a space for free. But we found some different breweries that had really big open spaces, and they usually would let us bring food because they didn't have food there. So we would get donated food and bring it, and then the volunteers would buy their own drinks. Or if we had at a restaurant, they would buy their own food, we would bring in drinks. So yeah, it was just a fun time to do that. When we did the platinum party, we would just print off some really basic certificates for them, acknowledging how long they've been with us, how many hours. If you go on canva.com, you can do that for free. They already have certificates made, and you can just change the colors. So we give them certificates. We'd also have the staff, we had a list of the volunteers, and we would have staff pick a volunteer off of there and write them a thank you note. right? It's usually, right, the dog team, it's a dog person, or just volunteers that had interacted with staff in a certain way. So we'd give those out too, which was always nice. And if we could get any free swag donated, sometimes we could get stuff donated, great. Then we would give them those or have stuff to raffle off, like door prizes and stuff like gift cards. So we'd do those as well. So I mean, any opportunities you have to acknowledge them, absolutely. But most of the things you can do are pretty easy and free, like note cards, get a big banner printed with your logo on it and have all the staff say thank you and say something nice. That goes a long way. Staff just being nice to volunteers is super helpful.
If you have an organization, a volunteer organization of say 200 volunteers, what is the role of the volunteer coordinator, and are they responsible for any other things in the shelter other than schmoozing and thanking the volunteers?
Good question. So Awesome Pets Alive just recently, about a year ago, or no, 2 years ago, sorry, we kind of shifted what the volunteer manager or coordinator did. And we did this after we did like an assessment of everything to see what was working, what wasn't. And we were looking at different places on how they do volunteer stuff. We ended up going with, it was the Canadian Code of Conduct for the volunteers. It was like most aligned with how we wanted to use volunteers, right? And when looking at that, that's when we came up with the vision statement. We're like, oh, we don't have a vision statement. So they had like a little check mark, like an audit sheet that you could go through and be like, are you doing this? Do you want to do it? And you can go through those things. So at that time, the volunteer manager kind of shifted to like an HR person. The volunteer manager is in charge of recruiting volunteers in, doing their onboarding process, and their really basic training before they get pushed into the programs. The programs should be doing those trainings. Some programs were doing this, some weren't quite ready to do that. So I still played a vital role with helping those different programs. Which I think is really the better way to do it. I know a lot of shelters are like, the volunteer manager literally manages all the volunteers. I mean, I can't imagine if any staff here had to manage 200 individual people. No, you can't do that effectively. That's impossible, and do other things. So you need to involve staff in all those different areas to help actually manage them. But like our CAT program, it didn't really have a training program going on. Basically, like I said, we were like, you got to know through orientation, have at it. We had a dog training program, but nothing for cats. And the cat staff was just spending their time training volunteers, and they couldn't just adopt cats and care for the cats. So I was like, why don't we just like kind of smooth this up? So I just helped them with a training program, did everything, got the volunteers, recruited volunteers to be the trainers for them, and then went to it and then was able to say, okay, Kristen, here's your trainers. You guys are going to talk to her if you have questions. And then if you need help recruiting new trainers, come talk to me and I'll help you with recruiting. Yeah, so I would definitely kind of start divvying those out. I mean, 200's a lot. It's a lot of people. So having those people to be accountable for them is good. Sometimes you can't. Like at PAC right now, we don't have anybody in charge. Like we don't have a dog manager. Like, right, we have a behavior manager, we've got a kennel manager, but we don't have somebody that's just like all dog stuff. So it's a little bit harder. So the volunteer manager there is a little bit more hands-on with that. And that's, I'm sure, unless you're a cat sanctuary or a shelter, dogs are usually your bigger volunteer pool. So they do need to do that to help manage that a little bit more.
So then the programs are actually run by volunteers.
Yeah.
So the people that manage the program are volunteers. So
Yeah.
the volunteer coordinator attracts, trains, more or less supervises your managers of each department or each program.
Yes. So yeah. So and that brings to a new thing. Putting volunteers in leadership roles. Do it. There's no reason. I mean, your volunteers are usually more skilled than your staff is. So use them. Use their skills that they have. Put them into leadership roles. And when you do those lead roles, again, do job descriptions so they know what expectation is, what time frame looks like. Some of the jobs like dog walking is huge, so you're going to have multiple leads do that stuff. because one person, unless they're just crazy and they have no other job, they usually aren't able to manage that. Have multiple leads, and have them start those programs. Our enrichment program at Austin Pets Alive was started by a volunteer. We said, we'd really like to start giving dogs enrichment once a week. Do we have a volunteer that'll be in charge of that? The volunteer is like, yes, I would love to do that. Great, great, great. The program now gives 220 dogs an enrichment item every single day. And it's really hard to do that. And it's still a volunteer-run led program. They have about 75 volunteers underneath them that make sure that every day those Kongs get cleaned, every day the Frozies and the Kongs get stuffed, every day they get passed out, and they have all those different teams that they manage, and then that lead reports to a staff person. So definitely make sure they know who they're reporting to. Austin Pets Alive was a little different than most of your guys' shelters. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm just making assumptions. It started as just volunteers. Dr. Jefferson was a volunteer. Everybody was volunteer. So it was already started with these volunteer leads. So it was kind of easy to do, but you can still start implementing leads. We're starting to do that at PAC, kind of figuring out where those leads would be most valuable and putting them in. And to do that, another big piece we miss and that causes conflict. I think we probably all have conflict in our organization with volunteers and staff. A big piece of that conflict is we're not getting input from our volunteers. We're just like, we just want you to come and do, and that's what we want you to do. Don't ask questions. Bam. So get some input. The easiest way is through some committees. Have a committee. Have a committee if you want to start with your dog program or your cat program. Find out what they would like to see done, and then have those committee members become leads so they can start recruiting those volunteers or creating those trainings and all of that stuff. I will warn you, committees make everything take way longer. I can bang out a training and protocol and all that stuff in a day for a program. It's going to take a couple months if you do it through a committee, but you're getting that volunteer buy-in, and you're going to have a lot less headaches in the long run to do that. Do you want to get this one? We got too many. I'm like,
Okay, so my biggest question I think relates to that is how to better manage the staff and volunteer conflict. And I'm coming from, so you have a little bit of background to answer the question, a municipal facility with unions that are opposed to volunteers.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
Okay.
so it's been a really rough road. And we've added some new levels for staffing and are trying to include in that. Well, if you want to increase the level, part of that means you'll have to commit to being part of training volunteers. And we're getting a lot of, but there's this constant battle, it's like a power struggle when there doesn't need to be one at all.
Yeah, and it's mostly with the unions.
And
right?
it's mostly, it's not the volunteer. The volunteers,
Right.
Our volunteers are amazing.
Right.
They're happy to help in any way that they want. They're not trying to take staff jobs. We haven't had volunteers take staff jobs. We've actually had more staff added, but our staff are just having a really hard time getting the buy-in to support the volunteer program. Therefore, we're having to deal with a lot of constant struggle for that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and for we were just talking about leads, your union is going to be like, ixnay on the hombre, there's no leads, because that means you're grooming them to be staff. So with something like that, with that conflict, that's just, right, that's a conversation that you got to, right, it's just like the conversations you got to have with your other shelter partners that don't want to work with you. It's just a long conversation and continual conversations, and probably taking baby steps, right? Like here's the positions we'd like to create for volunteers to do. Can we find one that you're okay with, right? And start with that one. And when they see, oh, they're not going to take our jobs, great. Or it's actually going to create more jobs. So I would probably start doing that to create. I think that's a really long process. Unfortunately, it's not a quick fix, but it's baby steps, and do that. As far as the conflict resolution piece, because we probably all have conflict-ish going on, whether it's volunteer, volunteer staff, staff volunteer. we did one of our committees at Austin Pets Alive was a conflict resolution committee. And it was headed by a couple board members, which made it was volunteers and then volunteer board members, which made it kind of good that the staff was out of that. And then they came up with their volunteer expectations, which was basically our code of conduct. And they came up with a conflict resolution, like a progressive disciplinary policy, but they called it accountability policy, I think. And it really, like some people are like, what, you're letting volunteers just make these rules for the organization? Nothing bad happened, it didn't go crazy. They were almost identical to the documents we already had, but there were some word changes, there was a couple things in there. If anything, it was actually a little bit more stringent than what we'd originally had. But then putting those out, it was, right, we put them out to all the volunteers. We're like, this was, you guys all worked on it. We put it out to staff. We're like, this is how we handle conflict now. It's not, right, you can't do the tattletale stuff. And this is how we're going to work it out. And we're working on that right now at PAC. Right now we have this grievance form where so you can just like complain. It's a complaint form. Complain about somebody. And it just escalates everything, right? If a volunteer accidentally walked too close with me with a dog, and then I file a grievance form, it gets escalated to the volunteer manager, and now it's like a national incident, and it doesn't need to be. I could have just been like, hey, could you just keep the dog a little bit farther away from me? And they'd be like, oh, I didn't know. Great, now we're all on the same page. So having those conversations, and that was part of the conflict resolution that we did. So get your volunteers involved in that. And right, and again, it comes from staff down. Staff has to say, yes, we're gonna do this. Yes, when you have a volunteer that goes straight to your director over something silly, they're gonna bump it back down to the appropriate person too. So that way there's not mom going to mom instead of dad or whatever, so they can just bump it right down. Yeah. Cool.
Hi. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about volunteer recruitment.
Yes. Sorry, I was like there's some people in the back. Will you check them out? Okay, cool. Yeah, volunteer recruitment. The biggest thing with volunteer recruitment, if you're having problems getting volunteers, look at your process. When are you offering volunteer orientations? How often are you offering it? Where are you giving the information about it? One of my shelters I worked at, they had a tab on their webpage that said volunteers. You click on it, and it said, come to the shelter to learn more. I'm like, why is there a tab on here? This is stupid. Which I instantly just like copied everything off of APA's website and put it on there and changed it, right? Give them some information on their website. Be careful like not to overload them with information. Give them the information, like the basics. Don't tell them how to walk dogs, right? This is your process and some of the things you can do. So make sure that's on there. Are you giving that information? Is it easy for them to apply and get involved? The same organization, we were having weekly orientations and no one was showing up. Well, they were Mondays at 3 o'clock. Most people are at work Mondays at 3 o'clock. We changed it to Saturdays at 10, the very first one. 50 people showed up. The shelter had like 100 animals total. So it was like this super small shelter. And that's all we did. We didn't have to like limit it. We had to have signups and stuff because so many people were showing up. So look at those things and how you can just adjust those slightly and do that. Some of you guys are in like rural communities and you're like, I need somebody to do web design or whatever, marketing things. You can use things like Volunteer Match. It's a national volunteer listing, opportunity listings. At that shelter was a very small rural shelter. I put those on there. I had people designing flyers for our adoptions that lived in New York. So you can totally tap into that stuff. Most of the stuff you have volunteers do, they don't have to be in your shelter to do it. Well, not most of it, a lot of it. You don't have to do it in the shelter. Volunteer Match. And look within your communities. There's a lot of different ones. When I lived in Pittsburgh, they had their own. It was called Pittsburgh Cares, where you could put volunteer opportunities. And that's where I got lots of my event volunteers. People didn't want to come to the shelter. They were too sad. We had a pretty nice euthanasia rate. So people didn't want to come to the shelter. But they would totally come and gift wrap for a fundraiser. So I would publicize it there because those were people that would never look at our website. So you can look at that. At APA, I had our listings, especially our really big ones that we couldn't fill really easy, on that volunteer match too, with just like instructions to go to our website to become a volunteer. Yeah.
That volunteer match, you set it up as a virtual request.
Mm-hmm.
And so the lady that did our website is saying,
Yeah, so you can
give a zip code.
you can say where the opportunity is at, and you can say it's either virtual or what location it is, so you can get people all over the place to do things.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question about helping our volunteers improve their accessibility with larger dogs. I work for a shelter for a municipality, and we have a 98.5% save rate, which means a lot of the animals in our shelter, a lot of our dogs are quite large. They have very, very diverse experiences with people, and therefore, I mean, long story short, can be a little intimidating.
Yeah, they're a little naughty.
So how can we better communicate with our volunteers what their expectations should be for our animals' behavior, how to keep themselves safe, because a lot of them have the, like, goo goo gaga, you're my baby, blah, 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 mentality, and while none of our animals are dangerous,
Right.
some of them aren't super fond of that approach.
Right. Yeah, no, that's...
We don't want to discourage volunteers, so we're trying to find accessible ways to communicate with them about that.
Absolutely. And that, right, again, that comes back to expectations. Austin Pets Live, probably the exact same dogs, right? They've got some naughty notes, and I might be able to touch one dog, and she cannot touch that same dog. So setting expectations from the front for the dogs, and we did this for the cats too. We just had like a introductory video about dogs where we just talked about what it looked like. We're like, hey, you're gonna walk dogs. They're gonna be really big. They're gonna be pit bulls. They're gonna be sometimes naughty. You're gonna get poop on your hands and clothes. This is what it's gonna look like. And these are also the expectations. We need you to come in 2 hours a week to walk the dogs. We need X, Y, and Z. So setting up those expectations ahead of time kind of weeded some of those people out. And then with the trainings, there's probably a lot of people in here that do like dogs playing for life stuff, right? So putting those different trainings, we have our dogs leveled out, and then those colors indicate a behavior, not a bite risk level. So, right, our green dogs are, yeah, anybody can touch them. Our pink dogs, anybody can touch them. Our orange dogs are shy and nervous, but not defensive. Our blue dogs are jumpy and mouthy, right? They're those like hooligan dogs. The silver dogs are gonna be reactive. They might redirect, maybe have some other naughty notes. Our yellows are gonna be those shy, nervous, defensive dogs, right? And then we have like red dogs for minimal handlers. Maybe they got some quirks and we need to only have certain people work with them to work through those quirks. So having those different colors and really specific and having trainings for each of those colors is super helpful for those volunteers so they know what they're getting into. A lot of our volunteers would be like, I don't want to go past orange. They love those shy, nervous dogs, right? Great. Some other volunteers are like, give me those hooligan dogs. Let's do it. So everybody could kind of go where they wanted to go and get the appropriate training to keep them safe. One thing we learned at Austin Pets Alive was the number of hours you make your volunteers walk in between those levels doesn't matter. We were having a shortage of really easy dogs. We're like, let's just get rid of the hours. And if somebody has lots of experience, they can maybe go through faster. Or they can go through slower. And we found out volunteers were actually pacing themselves really good. There were those volunteers with significant handling experience that could go through nice and quick and start helping us with those super naughty dogs faster, and then others would stay kind of low. So don't do that. Worry about, oh, they have to do 30 hours or they're gonna be unsafe. If you're a bad dog handler for the first 15 hours, you're going to be a bad dog handler for the next 15 hours. So those aren't a determining fact. That's not a training, making them walk dogs. Yeah. Is that it? All right, that's it. Thank you guys so much for coming. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up and talk to me. And you can also find me at monica.dangler@pima.gov. Cool. Thanks, you guys.